I think anyone who's coming up here to take an important position like the head of Stratcom in charge of 41,000 people, it's an extremely big deal. Out of a military of 1.3 million people, we only have 38 four-star generals. I think it's a very rare thing to be a four-star in the U.S. military. And it's hard to notice that we are losing 4 stars, 3 stars, and even 2 stars in a pretty unusual way over the last 9 months. Just in those months, we have lost the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, the Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force, the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, Chief of Naval Operations, Commander of Cybercom and Director of NSA, Commander of Southcom, Commandant of the Coast Guard, the SMA to the SecDef, the Director of DIA, Naval Special Warfare Commander, the top Army lawyer, the top Air Force lawyer, representative to NATO, the Joint Staff Director for J5, the Joint Staff J3, and the Chief of Naval Research. By my count, that is 17 GOFOs, general officers, who have been removed from their positions or retired early in 9 months. I'm a former CIA officer, so we used to look at other foreign militaries and make assessments on them. If I saw 17 general officers removed from their positions in a foreign military, we would call that a purge. That's the technical definition when a new leader comes in and just cleans house. The places where we've looked at these kinds of things are places like China, right, where they remove large numbers of officers at one time. I used to work on Iraq. They would do the same thing. It is very clear that the Secretary of Defense is trying to reshape the department in ways that are very different than previous administrations, and he is critical of anyone who takes issue with him, his leadership, or decision-making of him or the president. Now, you've repeated many times, rightly, that your job will be to give best military advice. But what we are seeing over and over in black and white is that when people in similar positions give their best military advice, they get removed. If that military advice is somehow not in line with the thinking of this president and the secretary, you get fired. So there's going to come a moment. I don't know when it's going to be. I hope you never have it, but there will be a moment behind closed doors, not when the lights are on and the hearings going on, when you will have that really existential decision you will have to make. Do I give my best military advice and tell people news they don't want to hear, information they don't want to hear? Or will I just go along to get along to make sure that my bosses are happy and I don't rock the boat? You swore an oath over and over your whole career to the Constitution, not to any one man, not to one president, but to the Constitution of the United States. So can you say with conviction, when your moment comes, because it's coming, you're behind closed doors and you have that moral and professional obligation to make, that you, at risk, knowing that your job is at risk, you will say the right and best military advice based on facts and not just what Secretary Hegseth wants you to say?
Senator, over the course of my career, I've adhered to that principle, and I will adhere to that principle going forward, consistent with my oath to the Constitution.
Well, we are counting on it, and we've had every single nominee come up and say the same thing. I've asked this question to pretty much every single nominee that's come up before me. But those moments are happening, and I think we can see just by the sheer number, 17 general officers removed in 9 months, that you will have that career-defining moment. And because your job involves nuclear weapons, there couldn't be a more important set of issues to work on when it comes to sort of moral decision-making. We are counting on you. The young folks who work for you, those 41,000 people, are counting on you to make the right decision when the doors are closed. So thank you, and I encourage you all of Godspeed.
This exchange from Senator Slotkin is more than a tense confirmation moment. It's a front-row warning about what happens when partisan politics meets military leadership. Start with the basics viewers need to understand. The U.S. military is not supposed to be a partisan tool. Officers take an oath to support and defend the Constitution, not to safeguard any single politician or political project. Slotkin lays out a pattern, dozens of senior officers leaving or being pushed out in a short span, followed by a top-down drive to shrink the ranks of high-level officers, all while asking a nominee whether they'll risk their career to give blunt, professional military advice rather than tell leaders what they want to hear. That's a legitimate national security worry because the professional military's independence and commitment to the Constitution are structural safeguards for the nation. That oath and the customs around it are what allow military advice to be frank, evidence-based, and risk-tolerant, exactly what civilian leaders need when they make life-or-death decisions. If officers are routinely fired or forced out for giving unwelcome counsel, that incentive structure changes overnight. Future officers will naturally self-censor, and civilian leaders will increasingly get the answers they want, not the answers they need. Slotkin's use of the word purge is strong, and that word matters because of precedent. In stable democracies, mass removals of senior officers are rare and typically tied to clear, apolitical reasons: retirement cycles, force restructuring, misconduct. When leadership changes produce large, rapid departures concentrated among politically influential roles, it starts to look like a purge, something observers associate with authoritarian governments where loyalty matters more than competence. That's why Slotkin invoked examples from authoritarian states as an analogy. The pattern isn't just personnel churn, it can signal a systemic shift in how the military will operate and whom it serves. Digital comments. We also need to parse the administration's stated rationale versus the observed effects. Secretary Hegseth frames his initiative as efficiency and less generals, more GIs, a resource reallocation to prioritize battlefield readiness over bloated headquarters. Those are defensible goals in the abstract. Militaries should be lean where possible. But the problem arises when cuts appear selective, when senior leaders who disagreed with policy leave disproportionately, or when changes are accompanied by pushback against dissenting voices. That's what turns an efficiency reform into a politicizing force. Independent evidence, transparent criteria, and collegial processes for officer assignment and removal are the guardrails that stop reforms from becoming reprisals. There are concrete risks when the Pentagon becomes politicized. First, decision-making quality declines. Civilian leaders lack the candid military judgments that expose operational risks. Second, morale and retention suffer. Capable officers considering a 30-year career see an unpredictable future and may leave earlier, draining institutional knowledge. Third, civil-military trust erodes. Congress, allies, and the public start to doubt whether the military will act based on national interest rather than partisan loyalty. These aren't theoretical points, they're the predictable downstream effects of constrained professional independence. So what are practical reforms that protect both civilian control and military professionalism? Start with transparency and criteria. Any structural reductions or reassignments of senior officers should be accompanied by clear, written justifications, performance metrics, and appeals processes, not surprise memos. Strengthen Inspector General reviews and congressional oversight so changes are subject to independent scrutiny. Codify protections that make clear when civilian leaders may remove officers for cause and when removals cross into politicized territory. And finally, bolster training for civilian appointees on the norms of civil-military relations, so they understand why dissenting advice is a feature, not a bug, of a healthy national security process. These are institutional fixes that preserve civilian supremacy while protecting the military's ability to deliver honest counsel. For viewers who feel alarmed but want to be constructive, here's what you can do. Demand transparency from your elected officials. Ask your senators and representatives to press for public reporting on the criteria used for senior officer changes and to support bipartisan oversight hearings where classified concerns can be reviewed in secure settings. Support nonpartisan organizations that document changes in military leadership and analyze their implications.